Hey guys, this is Pedro back with another video covering the VCT, and for this occasion I'm not going to be doing it in the form of an interview as I always do for this channel. I'm going to be taking a different approach. I'm more so talking about recent news that just popped up that has the potential to impact the VCT landscape for the 2025 season and also everything beyond that. There was a recent article that just popped up from Mikhail Klimentov that relates to the Valorant scene. And so in that article, it mentions about how there was an internal Esports World Cup document that he received that includes Valorant into its 2025 event lineup. And so for those of you who aren't really familiar with what the EWC is, Esports World Cup, it is an event that features an array of esports titles, major esports titles such as League of Legends, Dota 2, Counter Strike, and Teamfight Tactics, stuff of that nature in the top level of recognition within the esports scene. They would hold events in Saudi Arabia for the better part of a few months, scattered across that calendar. And so you'd have plenty of major teams, major orgs, major players fly over to Saudi Arabia for a short amount of time, compete for a large prize pool. A lot of the times it would be around millions of dollars, and so they would compete there, and then they would fly back to competing in their respective professional circuits in their respective fields. And so we saw that happen. The first edition of that happened in 2024 this year. Most interestingly enough, Valorant was not included into the 2024 edition, but that changes for next year in 2025, as it says in the article. All fingers point to Valorant being included into the EWC for 2025. Getting into the article itself, reading off of it, of course, by Klementov, Valorant and Valorant Game Changers, the latter being the game's professional circuit for women and marginalized genders, are included in an internal 2025 EWC document that details a near final lineup of games and events that will be present at the tournament. The document, which was viewed by Klementov and its respective outlet, characterizes the lineup as all but confirmed, though the document includes language that suggests the list has not been formally finalized. The number of events in the document, 25, matches the number of slots for announced and teased events on the EWC Countdown website, which is visible to the public. In a statement that was given to Klementov by Riot in the form of a spokesperson, which was done in regards to the document that Klementov is reporting on, the spokesperson categorically denied that Game Changers would be included in the 2025 lineup. Interestingly, they didn't include the former side of it, the Valorant side, Tier 1, assumedly speaking. But still, they denied that Game Changers would be in the 2025 lineup and said that discussions about its games appearing at the EWC, not really focusing on Valorant, but more so every title within the Riot Games ecosystem. All of those discussions about those games are still ongoing. And when I read that for the first time for myself, it kind of brought about my question that I said to John Needham and Leo Faria back in Valorant Champions 2024 before the start of finals weekend. There was a media day in which those two people and also two others were present to receive questions from the media, either remote or in person, about everything that's going on within the Valorant esports scene. And so I had an opportunity to ask a question. I asked them about the possibility of Valorant being in the EWC sometime in the future, not specifically focusing on 2025 or next year, but more specifically in general. I basically asked them, paraphrasing, of course, what would need to happen for the game to be included in the EWC or what would not need to happen for it to not be in the catalog. And so they basically responded to me saying, I quote, "We'll see what happens in the future. We're actively discussing with them." And so it's a vast contrast to what we're seeing right now in the article. Right now, it's basically saying that Valorant is all but confirmed, 99.9% in EWC right now. But back then, we saw Needham say, "Okay, everything's not really clear. They're still in negotiations. They're still in conversations about that." happening, whether or not, of course. But of course, we saw the spokesperson uh, deny GC being included into the EWC, and also on top of that, saying that the conversations were still ongoing, the status was still unchanged in relation to back then in Valorant Champions. But nevertheless, with this report coming to light, Valorant getting into EWC brings about how this will impact the VCT landscape. And on top of that, what I want to emphasize for this video is how the VCT schedule has already been disclosed. It's already been revealed. It's already been known to the public. It's been released like at least a month for a month now, and the schedule is mostly unchanged compared to what we saw in 2024, save for a few more weeks being given in terms of rest for the teams that are taking part in Tier 1. Nevertheless, it brings about the question about how that will fit into the EWC or into the main calendar, whether or not EWC is going to get into, it's going to squeeze in somewhere within stage 2 or Masters Toronto, because that was around the time in which the 2024 edition was held, sometime in the summer just before the fall. And so one has to wonder if that's going to happen as well, or maybe it's going to fit into like earlier on in the season, more so like after Bangkok or before stage 1, you know, but still, on top of that, one has to wonder about how that this will affect the players and the teams, because, as you guys know, I had a chance to talk to plenty of the players and teams that competed in Masters in BCT Americas, and they mentioned about how it was difficult to kind of continue their form from competing in an international event and then translating that form to the best of their abilities over onto the domestic side, and then continue their season on the road to champions, and how that was tough, that was grueling, and that how that was exhausting. And so, you put that in, you have that still stick within your mind, and you add to that onto the possibility of of the EWC getting into the VCT calendar, and one has to wonder like how this will affect the players, well-being, health, mental state, and all of that jazz. And so you got that to consider. You also have to consider obviously game changers, and it including people such as women and people of marginalized genders, aka transgender women, non-binary people, and how they will fit into Saudi Arabia. And of course, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, uh, basically, so to speak, it is not favorable to the LGBTQ community. Most specifically, they prosecute, or more so persecute, people who support the LGBTQ community in the form of unfair trials, in the form of torture, in the form of sending them over to the death penalty, sentencing them to the death penalty in very quick, very unfair trials. It's been reported plenty of outlets. I'm not going to try to get into the cream of the crop type of thing. Some of my contemporaries have already talked in length about the Saudi Arabian government and their policies that are against LGBTQ community, and also on top of that, people that have criticized the government. I'll leave a link to those kinds of things in the description. For example, Sideshow made a video about it. Klimentov wrote plenty of pieces about it. Another one of my colleagues, James Fudge, has written plenty of articles for his respective outlet in the Esports Advocate. And then on top of that, Richard Lewis have gone on lengths and have done plenty of videos talking about the Saudi Arabian government. But as it relates to game changers, one has to wonder about whether or not the Saudi Arabian government will be favorable towards such players such as Fluorescent or SRN, and also like Jellybanks, people that have competed most recently in the GC Championship event. And you look at them as possibly getting into the EWC because of their recent track record of competing in the top level of Valorant Game Changers, and whether or not they will be treated fairly. Hey YouTube, this is Pedro with a post edit, or more so during edit clip that I want to add into this video as it relates to the GC players that has the potential to probably compete in the EWC or not. Well, while it is true that we have seen plenty of female tournaments take part in the EWC, like more specifically Mobile Legends hosting a women's tournament and housing all of these players for a certain amount of time. It is not fair. It is not conclusive in the sense that we might see a similar occurrence for the transgender players or non-binary players, because in that event we mostly saw women, and it's fair to say that it's not really concrete as to whether or not we're going to see transgender people actually get into the EWC and also being allowed to compete in it, because of their track record of treating such people behind the scenes. And it just makes it all the more confusing, all the much more worrying for such players. But nevertheless, we've seen plenty of times in which such people are allowed to compete, or more so attend, or more so visit the country, as a way to create a more positive image, a more inclusive environment within the country. So as a way to not only bring in positive attention, but also bring in more investment into the Saudi Arabian projects that they want to launch, and also such projects that they want to uh, sustain well into the future. So it's just another dynamic that I want to bring in relating to this particular topic before I move on to what else I have to say in the edit. So, Pedro, Romero, I'll see you guys in a few seconds. So, plenty of circumstances, questions, grievances, and all of that stuff have propped up in relation to that topic. Uh, but nevertheless, what I want to kind of touch upon as it relates to Saudi Arabia and the EWC is how many people view it within the esports side as sports washing. And for those of you who aren't really familiar with sports washing, I'll try to describe it to you. It's more so an attempt by a government to put attention away from their atrocities, given atrocities, as in abuses of human rights for a particular group of people within the country, and then take that attention and put it towards the things that they want everyone else to be focusing on. For example, major sporting events, major concerts, major events that all in all, this leads to a subsequent better public image to the country and the organizers that create these major events, at the cost of those that are trying to shed more light to the atrocities that are uh, being done simultaneously by the same group. And we've seen this happen time and time again over history. For example, we've seen Nazi Germany uh, organize the Summer Olympics in the 30s as a way to obtain a more better public image to the rest of the world. And of course, this preluded their start of World War II in the late 1930s, early 1940s. And then another example is which I want to bring up more in focus is Qatar in the 2022 World Cup, and how they were in charge of creating the stadiums and creating the infrastructure, creating the logistics, all at the cost of migrant workers, and them having to go through grueling working conditions, and some of which, and a good number of which, dying as a result. And so that breeded plenty of outrage, plenty of reports, plenty of coverage from news outlets all around the world towards the preparation of the 2022 FIFA World Cup. And so that kept on happening, in crescendo in the lead up to the World Cup. And once the World Cup actually happened, if you guys can remember, not many focus was put onto the same news itself. Moreover, there was plenty of attention towards the games itself and how awesome it was and how great it was, and more specifically how legendary the FIFA World Cup final was between Argentina and France. At that time, once the competition ended, there was not a lot of attention towards the conditions of the migrant workers and how terrible of a situation they were in. No, no, no. More attention was more put towards Messi and Mbappe and Argentina and France and how of a wonderful game that was, and how Qatar was the site of possibly one of the greatest football matches of all time. And such sentiment remains to this day. Nowadays, people don't really look at as Qatar as the place where we saw these atrocities and how there was a broken system in relation to the workers that were in charge of creating the stadiums. We don't really see much attention towards that. Now we see more sentiments of how good the World Cup was and how much of an open environment and how much of an inclusive environment and how much of a fun environment it was for the fans to partake in within a country like Qatar. And ignore this basically leads to little attention being put towards the atrocities that were made by the Qatari government and more towards, the good things that the Qatari government did. And as a result of that, that leads to no accountability, and more acceptability towards people like the Qatari government. And on top of that, in relation to the Qatari government, the Saudi Arabian government. And you can kind of see the similarities between the Qatari government and the Saudi Arabian government. And of course, people will kind of say, okay, sure, um, we're seeing all of this attention towards Saudi Arabia in a negative light, but what about other countries that have done the same? What about America? And to that, I counter that by saying, okay, sure, that is true in the sense that we've seen the U.S. military partake in sponsorships, and at the same time, them having their own atrocities as well in manufacturing plenty of death and destruction. But in looking at their investment in esports, that's basically it. Just a few sponsorships, a few endorsements for a few occasions within the esports scene. You compare that to what is happening in Saudi Arabia with the EWC and the Saudi Arabian government's support and organization of the EWC. Their organization is far times much more greater than what we're seeing in America and also other countries in the world that are trying to support the esports scene. And so, at the very end of the day, how is this going to affect the Valorant scene in particular? Well, for starters, we're probably going to see the EWC being included in the VCT calendar somewhere down the line. If it's not going to happen in 2025, I basically assume that I basically think that it is going to happen in 2026 or maybe 2027, just because of how we've seen League of Legends and Team Fight Tactics being included into the EWC, and with it also being a part of Riot, I can kind of see it happening also for Valorant somewhere down the line. And how this will affect the players, as I said, it's going to be pretty tough for them to have to focus on another event. Maybe we're going to see, then again, we're probably going to see, the same happen in Valorant in the form of it not even lasting a few days or not even lasting a full week at the most. The players will probably have to just focus on playing a few best of threes and maybe one best of one, and then that's it. They move back over to respective leagues. But nevertheless, and so plenty of questions will continue to pop up from the time this video is published to the moment in which the EWC finally announces their final lineup for the 2025 edition. Plenty of grievances will be made, plenty of arguments will be had, and plenty of conversations will be had. But at the end of the day, we'll basically have to see what happens in the future, and I'll be here definitely to cover that when an update does arise. And so, with that said, it's been Pedro covering VCT, EWC, EWCX, VCT, and with that said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.